Okay, there we go. Right, so we are in Sanhedrin 11a. I'm going to share my screen with you. I'm going to try and share my screen with you in Manchester rather than so. I'm probably not going to be able to see you same time as share the screen. So if you want to say something, you can shout out as opposed to wave frantically or put your hand up thing, because I probably won't see it. So I'm going to share the screen now and see what happens. Oh, actually, the thing. Right. Okay. So we were talking about last time. We were talking about the Asara Harugim Malchus, the 10 martyrs, and we spoke about the idea that there was some poetic license because the 10 of them were not necessarily contemporaneous, and some of them weren't even alive at the same time. And if you read the Eila Eskara, which we did a bit last week, it appears that they all sort of were martyred on the same day, which wasn't the case. One of those who was martyred was a man called Yehuda ben Bava, and he gets an honourable mention over here in our Gemarah, specifically because we spoke about, just a bit further up the page here, we spoke about the idea that Hillel was considered Hey Chosid, Hey Anav Talmido Shel Ezra. Hillel, when he died, they said about him that he was pious, he was humble, and he was a pupil, as it were, of Ezra. And then they said the same thing about Shmuel HaKatan. Over here, Shmuel HaKatan was the same idea. Hey Chassid, hey Anav Talmido Shel Hillel. He was a pious man. Woe, we've lost the humble man, and he was a Talmid, a pupil of Hillel. Now, since we've mentioned humility and piety, they mention Yehuda ben Bava, because here he's another one of the people who were considered to be extremely humble and extremely pious. And so he gets an honorable mention here. And so it says, the Gemarah says here at the bottom of our page here, Ba'al Yehuda ben Bava bikshu lomar kain. Now, about Yehuda ben Bava, they wanted bikshu from bakasha, from a request, or bevakasha, please. Bikshu lomar kain. They wanted to say a similar thing about him, i.e., that he was humble and pious and was a of Hillel, etc. Ella she nitrafa sha'a. The hour was torn. The hour was torn. Funny expression, that. Taraf. Where do we have that word taraf? We're about to have it in the next couple of weeks, Cedras. Taraf. Any offers where we have that word taraf? Apart from David, who will tell us instantly. Any offers?
I wondered if it was treif, but that's not the question that you're asking.
No, it isn't the question I'm asking, but it is the same word. It is the same word. Treif literally means torn apart. And why is treif not kosher? Treif, an animal which is a treifa, then is an animal that was not killed appropriately. And it's as if it was torn apart. In other words, it was killed in an incorrect way. So it's the same word. Taraf means to tear apart. So you are right, Julia. That is the same root of the same word, but that wasn't the word I was thinking of in the Torah that we're going to read in the next couple of weeks. Avril, I can see you've unmuted.
No, I just wanted to, just following on from what Julia said, was it not about how when they sold Yosef, he was allegedly taking limbs from an animal, something like that? Wasn't that the slander?
Okay, so you are partially right. And that is the story of Joseph. When the brothers decided that they were going to kill Joseph, and then they threw him in a pit, they brought him out, sold him down to Egypt, and they took his coat of stripy coat of colors, his special coat that Yaakov had given them. And what did they do to it? They dipped it in the blood of an animal, of a goat. And they took it to Jacob, to Yaakov, and they said, Akerna, do you recognize this coat? And he said, oh, yes, of course I recognize it. Taraf Yosef, or my son has certainly been torn apart by a wild animal. Jacob saw the coat full of blood and assumed that it was Joseph's blood. And that he had been torn apart by an animal, and he was dead, when in fact he wasn't dead, as we know. He'd gone down to Egypt as a slave. But that same word, taraf, to be torn apart. So you're right, Avril. It was a story of Joseph, and you're well, Julia, that it's the same word as treifa. But here it's a funny expression, nitrafa sha'a. The hour was torn from them, as it were. Can everybody mute themselves, because I'm not quite sure how to do it on this. Hang on, I probably can do it on here. Wait a minute. No, don't know how to do it on here. So can you all mute yourselves, because I can hear some background noise.
After you know.
Right, so the hour was torn from them. In other words, as it says in the translation here or in the notes, the opportunity was lost. They couldn't do it. They wanted, Bikshu Lorkain, they wanted to eulogize Yehuda ben Bava and say what a humble and pious man he was, but they were not able to do so. Why? She'ein maspidin al harugei malchut. Anybody who is executed by the government, you do not do a eulogy over. You do not do a eulogy over somebody who is executed by the government. Now, the Gemarah gives a few suggestions as to why that is, or the notes give a few suggestions why that might be. Anybody would like to hazard a guess as to why we do not eulogize, we do not say a hesped on those who have been executed by the government? We don't do a public eulogy. Avril?
I was only just thinking that don't we have some sort of halakhic obligation to respect the government and the political structure? So it would be sort of it would almost be saying in parentheses that he was, that the execution was wrong, and saying he was a great man. Maybe I don't know. That's just what.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I'm not sure it's a halachic. You are right about the halacha. There's a halacha that says dina de malchuta dina. The laws of the land are the laws, and you have to keep them. And you're right about that. And you're also right that by eulogizing somebody who has been executed by the government, you are in fact saying that this guy did a good thing. And the corollary to that is that, well, you're likely to get in trouble, aren't you? If you go eulogizing somebody that the government's executed, the government officer going to come and say, well, you clearly agree with him, so we'll execute you as well. And so there is a danger. There's a danger there that you get into big trouble, and it could threaten people's lives, and then if it becomes pikuach nefesh, and therefore you don't do it. So that's one reason. any other offers as to why you don't eulogize somebody who was executed? Another reason. Okay, so another reason that's given is that one of the problems that they had at that time, and we're talking about times of the Romans, was burial. As we know, one of their methods of execution was to kill them and put them on a crucifix, on a cross. Halakha dictates that burial should take place straight away, as quickly as possible, in order to preserve the honor of the dead person. Kavod hamet, the honor of the dead person. If there was eulogies going on, then you would be delaying that, and you would be in danger for the same reason that Avril said, that they may not allow burial at all, because you've wound them up by eulogizing them when they've done something wrong against the government. So there was a worry that they would not allow the burial, and the burial would be delayed, and therefore the opportunity to bury them would be lost. So at that time they did not eulogize those who were harugei malchut, who were killed by the government, executed by the government, and Yehuda ben Bava was one of those, and so he did not receive the eulogy that they wanted to give him. Had they been able to give him that eulogy, this is what they would have said about him, that he was a pious and humble man, in the same way that Shmuel HaKatan was singled out for that honor, and the way that Hillel HaZaken, Hillel the elder, was singled out for that honor as well. So Yehuda ben Bava was one of those who merited that honor, but didn't actually get it. Now, as you can see here at the bottom, page 14a of the Gemarah, which at this rate will take us about another 7 or 8 months to get to. It's explained why he died and how he died. So I think it's worthwhile just skipping to 14a to see exactly what's going on and what happened there. I think our Gemarah. Let's just have a look. No, it's not this. It's a bit earlier than that. 14a. Yeah. Here we go. Right, it's on page 14a, which is on page 70. If you're in the what do we call the hard copy, it's on page 70. So the Gemarah there in page 4, the end of 13b, beginning of 14a, is talking about how many rabbis it takes to change a light bulb. No, not to change a light bulb, to do smicha. How many rabbis do smicha? In other words, to give ordination to the next generation of rabbis. And there's a machloket, there's a disagreement between the authorities as to whether it's sufficient that one rabbi can give smicha, or whether you need machloket. And Shepam Achat, there was a time, Gazra Malchut Harsha'a Shmad al Yisrael. There was one time, a wicked kingdom. Who was the wicked kingdom? The wicked kingdom was Rome, right? Rome. Gazra, they made a decree. Against Israel, Shekol Somech Yehareg. Anybody who gave oration would be put to death. V'chol hanismach yehareg, and every who received oration, rabbi, would be put to death. Ve'ir somchin ba yecharev, and the city in which this ceremony ordination took place would be destroyed. You can see the word churban in there, yeah? Charev, techarev, will be destroyed. The same word as churban habayit, the destruction of the temple. Utchumin yakru, and the boundaries, boundary that was set outside the city limits, which you call on Shabbat, 2,000 amot, 2,000 cubits, about what is it? 2,000 cubits is about 3,500 feet, about 1,000 meters, about a kilometer. You're allowed to walk outside the city limits, and they had boundary markers there in order to make sure you didn't go out of the tchum on Shabbat. Be a sign that the tchum stops here, and so you'd know not to go any further. And so the boundary markers were uprooted of the city. So this was what the punishment was that the Romans gave to anybody who was giving out smicha, anybody who received smicha, and the city where the smicha took place. So that was a decree that the wicked kingdom of Rome did. Goes to the Gemarah here. Me asa Yehuda ben Bava. So what did Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava do? He went, Ayashlo Shnei Harim Gdolim. He sat himself between two large mountains. Okay, and between, in the middle, in between, it means two great cities, two large, and between two boundaries, Shabbat boundaries. And they tells you where this was. Bein Usha le Shafaram, between Usha and Shafar, where he sat. And there's a little B there that tells you background and shows you where these places were. You can see where Usha and Shepharam were. There is Haifa. You can see a little in the boundary, the border of Israel there. Usha was just inland from Haifa and Akko, and Shepharam was next to it. So places. Result says Usha was a city in the lower Galilee, which served for a period of time as the seat of the Sanhedrin. From Usha, the Sanhedrin moved to Shepharim, a town nearby Zvulun Valley. The two located 2 miles of mountainous terrain. According to the cave of Rabbi Yehuda Bava is located between these places. There is a Greek inscription demarking the Sabbath boundary from Usha. So this is where it was going on, this thing. So what did he do? He went and sat in V'samach sham chamisha zekenim, and he gave smicha to 5 of his students. I see students he gave smicha to, and the Gemarah tells us who they were, and these are they: Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Elazar ben Shamua, Rav Avia Mosif, Af Rabbi Nehemiah. And Rav Avia said there was a 6th one called Rabbi Nehemiah. So you can see, if you were familiar with a bit of Gemarah, these are big names, these. Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon. They're such big names that they don't even get their surnames of who they are. Ben, who? Rabbi Meir is just Rabbi Meir. Rabbi is just Rabbi Yehuda. He's like, no, first division. And these people got smicha from Rabbi Yehuda ben in this scenario. So that's very brave of him, because he was risking his life question is, would he have done it or not? That's another question, because he was risking his life, koach nefesh and all that. But let's put that aside. And then what? Let's. When the enemies realized what was going on, Amar lahen, he said them. Who said to who? Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava said to the newly owned rabbis, "Bye, my sons, run for it. Get out of here. Make a run for it." As he says over here, run for your life. Amru, they said, our teacher, my teacher, what will happen to you? You can't run. Amar lahen, he said to them, Hareini mutal lifnehem even ein la hofchim. I will present myself to them like a stone which is not for turning. This is where we get the Iron Lady from. Yeah, she was not for turning. I don't know if she read this Gemarah. If she did, it would be a stone lady, not an iron lady. Because this stone of Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava, he says, I'm going to be like stone, and I'm not for turning. They won't be able to do anything to me, because I am fast in my belief here. And the Rav Steinsaltz says, even if you attempt to assist me, I will not be able to escape due to my frailty. But if you do it without me, you will also be killed. So he basically sacrificed himself and said to the students, you can run for it, you can escape, I can't. And this is where he met his death. Amru, they said about him, and this is detailed in the Asara Urugei Malchus, Lo zazu misham, they did not move from there. Who was they? The Roman soldiers who were chasing after them did not move from there. Ad shena'atzubo shlosh meot lunchiot shel barzel, until they had speared him with 300 iron or spear. And there's a picture over here of the type of spears that they were using. I don't know if you can see that. These spears, va'asauhu kichvara, and they made him into a sieve. They speared him 300 times, and he was like a sieve with loads of holes in him. There's two reasons why I think that was mentioned over here. One, because this was his method of execution, and it's part of the Asara Harugei Malchus. And secondly, what it's saying is that the Roman soldiers did not move from there until they'd inserted all these spears into him. Now, that must have taken a bit of time to stick 300 of them in him. I dare say 1 or 2 would have been enough to kill him, but they waited till they'd got 300 in him, at which time the students had managed to escape. So he sacrificed himself as the decoy for the escape of the students, and that was the greatness of Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava. He was willing to sacrifice himself for the next generation of students by doing this. So that's how Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava died. I'm presuming that is the why it's mentioned back in 11a, which we're going to see now. I think it's page 56 or 55, maybe. Yes, there it is, bottom of page 55. So that's why Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava gets mentioned here amongst the great, pious and humble people, because he sacrificed his life to save his students for the next generation. He didn't get his eulogy either because they were worried about the risks of eulogizing an executed person. So that's the end of that little section. Just to recap, we spoke about Hillel, we spoke about Shmuel HaKatan, and now we've spoken about Yehuda ben Bava in glowing terms of humanity and piety. And so now we come on to our little symbol over here, and we're on to well, it's not really a new subject, it's really an old subject, because if you remember, before we digressed into all that stuff, we were speaking about the intercalation of months into the year, making a leap year. And we were asking right way back, how many rabbis does it take to intercalate a year, to intercalate a month? Remember, we said there was a collation of the month, in other words, to make it a 30-day month instead of a 29-day month. And there was to make it a 13-month year as opposed to a 12-month year. And of course, the main reason for the intercalation of the year, the extra month in the year, was what was the main reason for intercalating a month? Why do we need a leap year?
So that Passover is always in the spring.
Yes, correct. Pesach must be in the spring. Why must Pesach be in the spring? Why must Pesach be in the spring?
Because that's when it happened, and it says you have to do it in the spring.
Correct. It's a very clear statement. It has to be the Chodesh HaAviv, in the spring month. It happened in the spring, and it has to be in the spring. And not only that, remember, there is a parallel festival going on here at Pesach. If you remember, we've spoken about this a few times. The festivals of Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot have dual reasons. Pesach, of course, the main reason is Yetziat Mitzrayim. We celebrate the Exodus from Egypt, but we're also celebrating the beginning of the harvest festival. We're beginning the beginning of the harvest. It's the harvest of the barley festival, isn't it? The barley harvest. So remember, on the second day of Pesach, we bring the Omer of barley. That's when we start counting the Omer, because that's when we bring the barley offering. So there's also an agricultural aspect to the festivals. So apart from the fact that it happened, the Yetziat Mitzrayim, the Exodus happened in the spring, and the Torah says you do it in the spring, it's celebrating a festival of harvest. And of course, if you don't do it at the right time, it doesn't make sense. So if we don't intercalate that month in the year, what will happen is what happens in the Muslim festival of Eid, is that it moves backwards 11 days every year, because the lunar year on which our calendar is based is 11 days shorter than the solar year. So every 3 years, it will move back a month. So if we start with Pesach in the month of, let's say, in the solar month of April, within 3 years, it'll be in March. Within another 3 years, it'll be in February. Within another 3 years, it'll be in January. Another 3 years, it'll be in December. So between 9 and 10 years, it'll be in the depths of winter. We're nowhere near spring, etc. So there has to be an intercalation of the year. An extra month is put in, and it's been worked out very cleverly that 7 times in a cycle of 19 years, there needs to be an extra month. And you can work out the maths of that, because 19 times 11, what's 19 times 11? Well, 20 times 11 will be 220. So 19 times 11 will be 209. So 209 days we've lost in 19 years, and therefore 209, call it 210, 7 into 210 is 30, or 30 into 210 is 7. So every 19 years, we need 7 extra months. So 7 years in 19 years, there needs to be an extra month. Now, we have a special cycle now. It's been worked out for forever and ever and ever. The fixed calendar, we know exactly which years will be leap years. This year is a leap year. In fact, when it's a leap year, we all say, oh, Pesach's late this year, because we stuck an extra month in. And then the year before a leap year, we all say, oh, Pesach's early this year, or it's late, or it's early this year because we're waiting for a leap year the next year. I've never heard anybody say Pesach's on time this year. So it's always either late or early. But the reason for that is because we intercalate a year. We've got a fixed calendar. We've got a fixed calendar now, so we know exactly when they were going to be. But back in the day of the Gemarah, they knew they needed 7 leap years in the 19-year cycle, but it wasn't fixed. So it had to be decided when the year was going to be intercalated. They knew they needed 7 in 19 years, but which 7? So there were other factors that may be taken into account. The main factor, of course, was the timing of Pesach. But there were other factors which they took into account when deciding which of the 19 years to make into a leap year. Shall we make it this year? Shall we make it next year? And the Gemarah is now going to tell us some of the factors that they took into account when they were making this decision. And it's really very interesting how they did it. So let's have a look in the Gemarah here, top of the page. Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught us, Ein ma'abrin et hashana, ella. There's our ein ella sentence. Remember, that means only. They only intercalated the year. They only made the year pregnant. Same word as pregnant there, ma'abrin. We've had that before. Ibur is a pregnancy. Ibur shana, a leap year, really means a pregnant year because it's got extra bits on it. So they only made a leap year, ela im kain yirtze nasi, only if the president, the prince, the head of the sanhedrin said so. It was his decision. You couldn't do it without his approval. Now, there's a machloket there as to what that really means. Did it mean that the decision was his or his alone? Or did it mean that the whole of the Sanhedrin made the decision, but it had to be, as it were, rubber stamped? It had to be signed off by the Nasi, by the president. And we'll see that the implications of that in a moment. So they're now going to tell us a little story that happened. Uma'aseh, and there was a story, there was an occasion, an occurrence. But Rabban Gamliel was the Nasi. He was the prince, the president of the Sanhedrin at the time. Shehalach litol reshut et hegmon echad besuria. He went to ask permission. Litol reshut, to ask permission. Etzel hegmon. The hegmon was the what's the word I'm looking for? The governor. The governor. That's the word. He was the governor in Syria. In Syria. Now, what was he going off to Syria for? This is a very interesting little statement that we need to stop and think about for a moment. We're talking now about the time where there was a Sanhedrin, where we appear to be making all sorts of halachot here, and it appears to be a time of stability, really. But we were not sovereign in our own land. The Jews were not in charge of their own destiny. There was a mandate, a governor over there in Syria who was in charge of the land. And anything that we wanted to do here, we had to seek permission for. We were not masters of our own destiny. And the Nasi had to go to Syria, to the governor, to ask for permission for whatever it was that he was asking for permission for. Now that was a bit of a schlep from wherever they were, probably in Usha or Shafarim or somewhere in the Galilee up there, where the Sanhedrin was based at that time. They had to schlep all the way up to Syria, and it wasn't an easy task to go and ask for permission. Contrast that with nowadays, we don't have to ask permission of anybody. If our Sanhedrin, as it were, if our parliament decides what it wants to do something, it will do it. And I think that's worth just stopping and considering again. I know we've done it many times before. I think it's worth stopping and considering that we are in such a privileged position today in the land of Israel, that we are sovereign in our own land, the first time that that has been the case for 2,500 years. Or more, in fact, probably more than 2,500 years. So it's quite a remarkable thing that we are living through a generation which is so privileged and special that even the great rabbis of the Gemarah, Rabban Gamliel, the Nasi, had to go and ask permission from the governor in Syria to do whatever it was he wanted to do. So I think that's just worth pondering for a moment. So off he goes to Syria to do what he's got to do, to go and ask permission for whatever. V'shahah lavo. And for whatever reason, he delayed in returning. He got delayed. Maybe there was problems with travel, whatever it wasn't easy. Maybe he didn't get to see the governor in time. He had to wait in his turn and they kept him waiting. Whatever reason, he was not able to get back in time for the decision to be made as to whether the year was to be intercalated and made into a leap year or not. This had to be done by a certain time. So what did they do? The Sanhedrin, Ibru et Hashana, they made it into a leap year. They decided it needed to be a leap year. Almanat Rabban Gamliel, on the condition, on the understanding that Rabban Gamliel would agree when he got back. And Ukashabah, and when he returned, Rabban Gamliel, when Rabban Gamliel returned, Amar, and he said, Rotze ani, yes, I agree. I want this to be a leap year. Nimtzeit, it worked out. Shana me'uberet, it was a leap year. Now, the implication, of course, there is that if he'd have said, Ani lo rotze, I don't want this to be a leap year, then that would not have happened. So they're telling us this story to show us two things. Number one, that the Nasi had a veto over the intercalation of the year. It was his final decision. But the Sanhedrin were able to make it into a leap year and then wait for his permission, and then retroactively it became a leap year. So it's an interesting little insight into how the workings of the Sanhedrin were with regards to the calendar. So now we're going to see some of the reasons why they may decide that a particular year needs to be one of the 7 out of 19 as opposed to any other year. and this is what the factors that were taken into account consist of. Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, Ein ma'abrin shana ela imkein hayta tzricha mipnei adrachim. The year can only be intercalated. You can only make it into a leap year if that is necessary. Mipnei hadrachim. What's drachim? What's the singular of drachim?
Derech.
Derech. Yes, just in time to tell us that, Leon. Well done. Derech. Derech means a way, doesn't it? But it also means a road. What's the word that we use for road in modern Hebrew?
Kvish.
Rachov.
Kvish, yes, kvish, and also
Rachov.
kvish is a made road. Rachov, yes, Rachov. So I live in Rachov Hachatzavim. The Rachov. Now, what's the root of the word Rachov? Anybody know? Anyone?
Rekev, a motor.
Rakevet is with a kaf. Rechev is with a kaf and not with a chet. So it's a different word.
Same root as for derech.
No, derech has got a dalad in it. So the root
Is it rachav for an open place?
Yes, yes, it is. Yes, it is. Rachav means wide and open. And we say that in Birchat HaMazon, don't we? Eretz, Chenda, a beautiful land, Tova,
Or
a good
chava.
land, what's the word? Chava, and a wide, open, spacious land. So Rechov, which is a street, is based on the word for open or wide, and it's so that's why a Rechov is a street, because it's a nice wide open space where you have your street. Now a derech means a way, and generally speaking, in modern Hebrew, a derech is a big road. So if you look at, you go down to Yerushalayim and you come out from the Kotel and you turn left, you get onto a road called Derech Yericho, the main road to Jericho. Don't suggest you go down there too far, because you'll end up in places you probably ought not to be. But it's called Derech Yericho, and the main Kvish, the main highway 6 in parts is called Derech Yitzchak Rabin. Derech tends to be a main road, and it comes from, obviously, the word Derech means the way. So Drachim is the plural of Derech, and so here it's talking about the roads. So imkein haytatzricha mipnei adrachim, the roads, if the roads needed it, then they would make a leap year. Now, why would the roads need a leap year? Why would it be necessary to make a leap year because of the roads?
Winter rain.
Yes, the rains. If they had a bad rainy, a lot of rain, and the roads had been damaged, remember, they weren't tarmacked. They were made of, they were made of earth, packed earth, maybe a bit of stone on top of them. But if it was a lot of rain, then the roads could become very muddy, and the chariots, the carts that were being schlepped along by the horses, the big wooden wheels would get stuck in the mud, and they would need to dry out. Now, when was the main time that these roads would be used? That would be the time when they were going to Jerusalem for the foot festivals, for Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot, and of course, particularly Pesach, because that's the one that comes straight after the rainy season. So it's all tied up in a way with what we said earlier on, which is that Pesach must be in the spring. If Pesach is creeping earlier because of the 11-day deficit in the lunar year versus the solar year, then there's not going to be enough time for the roads to dry out before people have to go from various places in the land of Israel to Jerusalem, and particularly from the north to Jerusalem. Of course, the north is where there's a lot of rain during the rainy season, more rain in the north than in the center and in the south. So, and also remember, that's where the Sanhedrin was based, up in the north. So if there'd been a rainy winter and Pesach was starting to creep earlier, the decision would be made by the Sanhedrin that these roads are not going to be very difficult, not going to be very easy for the Olei Regel, those who are going to Jerusalem on the foot pilgrimage, to get there. So they would make an extra month. They would stick in an extra Adar, an extra month of Adar, to make Pesach a month later. Pesach's late this year, and it gives an extra month for the roads to dry out after the rainy season. So again, it's all connected with the necessity of Pesach being in the right time, not only because the Torah says it's got to be in the spring, not only because it's got to fit in with a barley harvest, but also for a simple practical reason that people have to be able to get there to do their Korban Pesach. Remember, that's a mitzvah d'oraita. It's a Torah law that you have to do the Korban Pesach. Well, if you can't get there because the roads are impassable, then you can't do the mitzvah. So that was considered a legitimate reason to make an extra month and to intercalate the year if the roads would have been impassable due to the rain. And the same thing goes for the next one, umipnei hagesharim. The gesharim, singular gesher. Gesher is a bridge. You'll see that when you're driving along the roads. You'll see in Israel, you'll see quite a lot of the bridges have got names. Gesher Chaim, after somebody or other called Chaim, and Gesher means a bridge. It also means something else in Hebrew. What is gishur? What is gishur? The noun from gesher is also a noun, but another noun, gishur.
I think it's a mediation process.
It is indeed mediation process, Howard, correct. Gishur is mediation. And why is gishur mediation? Because when you mediate, you try and make a bridge between the two parties. Hebrew is such a wonderful language that because it's all based on, more or less, all based on three roots, you can see the development of the language and so clearly. So mipnei hagesharim, the bridges. So again, if the bridges were damaged for whatever reason, and they needed another month to get them into proper shape, in order for people to arrive in Jerusalem on time for Pesach, and that would be considered another legitimate reason for delaying Pesach by putting an extra month in the year. Now, on the same topic, there's another reason why they may intercalate the year. Umipnei tanurei psachim. Tanurei psachim. What's a tanur? You've all got one in your house.
Okay.
An oven. Tanur is an oven. Tanurei psachim were the ovens where they used to cook the Korban Pesach. Now I've got a bit of a problem with this maybe somebody can help me out. How was the Korban Pesach cooked? No, that's not true. Cooked implies something else. How was the Korban Pesach?
Wasn't it supposed to be on an open fire, not in a roast?
Yes, it was exactly right, Sharon. It was meant to be on an open fire. Sli Eish. It was on a mangal. It was on a barbecue, on a spit. And it had to be folded over, head in, like in the feet position. So what are these ovens all about then? Why did it say the ovens for the Korban Pesach?
Is it possible that part of the animal was burned on the open fire at the temple, and the rest of it was taken home and roasted by the people to eat at Seder?
I think that's right. I'm not sure if they were taken home, but I think that's right. I think that they were started off on the open fire because that's how it had to be. But you know, it would have taken a long time, and it's difficult to, I think, do this roasting process all the way through. So I think that probably what happened was, exactly as you've said, Sharon, is that they were started off on an open fire because that's how they were meant to do, and then they were finished off in communal ovens. In those days, not everybody had an oven at home. In fact, until very recently, not everybody had an oven at home. We know that even in fairly modern times, people would take their cholent on a Friday afternoon to the baker's oven and leave it in there overnight, and then they would come and get their cholent pot on Shabbos and take it home to eat it from there. They didn't have their own ovens. Same with the baking of bread. Having your own oven in your own home is a fairly modern concept. So these ovens would have been communal ovens, and again, they would, during the winter, they would get damaged by rain. They were made of earthenware. They were made of clay, and during the rainy season, they would get waterlogged, and so therefore, again, it was another month either for them to dry out, or if they had been destroyed completely and were unfit for use, there was another month in order to build new ovens for the Korban Pesach to be cooked in. But it's interesting that it mentions that this was in the ovens, and I think that was worthwhile pointing out, as Sharon has done, that they were probably started off on open fires and then finished off in the ovens. So that was another reason why it was said to be an excuse or a reason why they would intercalate the year. Let's finish off a few more reasons here. Umipnei galuyot Yisrael shene'ekru mimkoman va'adayin lo higiu. So people in the diaspora, basically in those days, we're talking about Bavel, Iraq. That's where most of them were. They left their homes to be Oleh Regel, to go to the temple, and for whatever reason, something delayed them. They presumably they left in time, but for whatever reason they were delayed, and it looked like they were not going to get there in time. Now, presumably messages were sent when this happened via I don't know, pony post or whatever, donkey post, to the Sanhedrin to say, we're struggling here, we're not going to get there on time. And so the Sanhedrin said, okay, no problem, we'll delay Pesach. Can you imagine that happened today? Can you imagine? Rabbi said, I'll tell you what, we can't get there in time. Let's make Yom Kippur a week later. I mean, it's the whole mind boggles, doesn't it, to this? It shows you that these it really it shows you about the power the power that the Sanhedrin had. We talk about the holiness of the day, right? We talk about the holiness of Yom Kippur. Now, Yom Kippur is a 10th of Tishrei. If we get it wrong, and we've got the calculation wrong, and we're out by a month, then it's the 10th of Tishrei, which is really not the 10th of Tishrei, it's really the 10th of Cheshvan, because we've put an extra month in. Where's the holiness? Is the holiness in the day itself, or is the holiness only when the Sanhedrin says it's got the holiness? And this clearly tells us that the power to make a day into a chag, to make a day into a holy day, lies with the Sanhedrin and not with Shamayim, and not with God, as it were. God makes the calendar, God makes the sun go around the moon. I mean, God makes the earth go around the sun, etc. But we, human beings, change the holiness into a different day altogether because we can't make it. The guys from Bovel got stuck at the border, send a message, and suddenly Pesach is a month later. I mean, I find that a remarkable thought, that the Sanhedrin had such power to change the holiness. And for me, this is something very, very important because, as you know, my very strong views are that the halacha is determined by the leaders, should be determined by the leaders of the generation. That's what Chelet behind me is all about. It's all about the dynamism of the halacha, modernizing the halacha. Well, clearly the Sanhedrin invested in themselves the power to change really fundamental things, including the holiness of the day. And so therefore I would invoke this as a proof that the halacha in the right hands can be fluid and dynamic and can change. So that was a good reason for changing it, that people couldn't get there. And now we've got a couple of reasons why it would not be intercalated. Aval lo mipnei hasheleg v'lo mipnei hatzina, not because of snow or cold, because, well, that was rare that there would be snow or cold, so cold that they couldn't get there. V'lo mipnei galuyot Yisrael shelo akru mimkoman, and not because of those who had not yet left their city. So if they hadn't left yet, then that was not considered a good enough reason, presumably because they should have left in time. If you're just late leaving because you're shlochish and you haven't got your act together and you haven't packed your mule properly,
Schluffish.
Oh,
then you that's not good enough reason to delay the festival for everybody else. If you left on time and through no fault of your own, you didn't get there in time because there was an unforeseen delay, then the Sanhedrin would consider delaying the festival for you. But if you just left late and you haven't yet left, and you send a message say, "Oh, I missed the bus," or whatever, I didn't get my things together in time, then that would not be considered a good enough reason to delay the festival. So I think that's a good place to stop. It's been an interesting, to me, an interesting insight into how the halacha worked back in the day with the Sanhedrin. The Nasi, the president, has a veto over intercalation, and there were practical reasons used to decide whether to intercalate, as well as the well-known reasons of making sure that Pesach is in the spring, and making sure that the barley harvest coincides with Pesach. Any comments, questions? I'm going to stop the share so I can see you all better. Any comments or questions about what we've done today?
Well, I wanted to say that the idea that today we don't have a Sanhedrin and that the rabbis of today can decide these issues as if we did have a Sanhedrin is certainly without any factual support. We can't do that, can we?
No, we can't. That's the problem, Nachum. The
I
problem
know, but-
is
Oh.
the problem is that we don't have a Sanhedrin. It has been tried a couple of times in fairly recent history. I think 3 times in the last 150 years to actually get together a Sanhedrin. The problem is that, I mean, there's no reason why we shouldn't have a Sanhedrin, and therefore we could make these big decisions. The problem is that we can't get agreement amongst the rabbis. We can't get together a cross-section of 70 rabbis who could agree on anything. Certainly
Yeah, but
not.
see, but they, go ahead. Sorry.
Certainly not on halachic issues. We can't get agreement. So, once you start factoring in politics and different viewpoints and different opinions on halakha, it becomes impossible to get agreement. And therefore, the attempts at making a Sanhedrin failed because they couldn't get agreement between the rabbis. So you're
why
right.
talk about it? But why talk about it then? I mean, we don't have the ability to do it. We don't have the substance that we can make a Sanhedrin. So why bring it up into conversation? Because it's only a superficial discussion. I mean, we don't have it. We can't have it because of what you just said.
Well,
So
if we
relevant?
didn't talk about anything we couldn't have, we might as well close our Gemarahs and not learn Gemarah, because
No,
we're
we can-
learning of all sorts of things that we can't have. The point
No,
is,
no,
I
no.
think I raise it because I think it's an important factor, and I think it's a tragedy that we don't have a Sanhedrin. And the reason we don't have a Sanhedrin is because of human failings of being unable to sit with our brothers and agree with one another.
Yeah, that's
And
good.
therefore, I raise it because I think it's an important feature of Jewish society. It's a failing in Jewish society, and it needs to be highlighted. And I make no apologies for raising it, and I make no apologies for raising it over and over again, because I think it's a tragedy that whenever rabbis sit down and try and agree on anything, they fail. And I think that's a real sad state of affairs.
It's right, but that's true. But to go beyond that and try to use it as a reason why we don't do this, we don't do that, we don't do this, it's not relevant. We know why, because of just everything you said is absolutely correct. But once you have that, why keep going beyond that? It's no value to it. I don't understand it. Okay.
I have to admit, I'm struggling to see what your point is here, but
I'd
okay.
like to tie them together, looking at the what we were discussing about the individual ovens. When I was studying Gemarah in a class in Seattle, we were studying brachot and learning about how Pesach was celebrated. And that there were so many people that would come up to bring the offering to the temple, that they then take the offering that they had made and bring it back and sit in a family circle around a big plate and eat their Passover meal. And that is the origin both of the Seder plate that we have on our table, and is also the origin of the concept of afikomen, which was everybody was so busy visiting after the long winter that they could never convene for the end of the service. And so they had to have dessert to bribe everyone to eat something. And then after that, they had to sit still at their own Seder plate. And that was sort of the organization of it. But now I picture people with all over the Temple Mount and around Jerusalem, with their ovens, finishing off their lamb and then eating the things from the Seder plate, and then having the afikomen, and oops, I had a candy. Now I can't visit anymore. I have to pay attention. The other thing in terms of what Nachum brought up is, David Hartman of blessed memory, what created the Hartman Institute after watching about 8 or 9 levels of kashrut on one El Al flight. And each level of kashrut had an extra level of tin foil, aluminum foil around it. And he looked at this and was appalled. And he came up with the saying that Hashem created kashrut not to keep the Jews from eating with goyim, but to force Jews to break bread with one another. So whether it's breaking bread or matzah with one another, I think it's very much what the kind of work Techelet is doing to try to stop making ritual observance something that separates us, but making it in a way that it can unite us.
Thank you,
Well,
Karen.
I don't know. I disagree. How in the world are we going to have Pesach eating bread when it's wrong? It's just wrong to eat bread on Pesach. And I don't know who. Mr.
What?
Hart-
I don't know
Did
what
you
you're
s-
saying. That had nothing to do with Pesach. No, that just had to do with an El Al flight. No. You misunderstood me, Nahum. Did
Oh, I
everybody
thought
else
that's what you said.
misunderstand me?
I think the expression that Sharon was using to break bread is an expression which means to eat together.
Yes, in
Not specifically bread.
civility and with holy conversation and not with trying to pick each other apart and judge each other to death.
Oh, okay.
I agree with that entirely. Leon, you wanted to say something.
All right, changed my mind.
Okay.
I'm being rather naive about something, but I'll talk about it another time.
Okay. All right. Any other comments, questions?
Just to say about the Hebrew language, although it wasn't sufficiently beautiful to get me to study it sufficiently, if you write the word zug in modern Hebrew, not a modern script, you'll see it's like hieroglyphics or onomatopoeic or something. It's astonishing.
Yes, if you write zug in script, it is a palindrome. That's
Yeah.
the word you were looking for, Howard. It's a palindrome. It reads the same forwards as backwards.
It's not only that, it's two people facing one another.
Yes, beautiful. That's a beautiful idea. I hadn't thought of that, but it is a palindrome because zug, a zayin and a gimel, of course, are mirror images of one another. That's a beautiful idea. That the two people looking at each other, and of course, we all know about palindromes, don't we? Because
Yes,
the
not lob is a palindrome.
palindrome of
I knew
Bolton is not lob.
you were waiting for that lob.
Doesn't work. It doesn't work. Absolutely. For the
For the
Americans,
uninitiated, we're
don't
talking Monty Python.
even bother going there. Don't even bother. The palindrome of Bolton is not lob. On
You know
that
the
note,
next.
I shall wish you a Shabbat Shalom because I will not be back until after Shabbat. I'm hoping on Sunday to do the Tanakh Shir from the Lake District in Northern England. You won't know the difference because I'll still have this background on. Although it's very, very beautiful there, I may take the background off and show you some beautiful English countryside.
For those of us who have not been there, please let us see the background.
Okay, I will try my best to find a beautiful, because it is an absolutely stunning place. It may not be quite so stunning in the middle of November because it might be cloudy and rainy, but I will
Clouds
do
and
my
rain
best.
are beautiful.
Yeah.
We come from Seattle. Clouds and rain are
It's like my
beautiful.
wife.
But you have a signal there.
Yes, I certainly hope so, but I will try and endeavour to send out the link more than half an hour before the show. In fact, I might even do it now. Shabbat Shalom, everybody.
Shalom.
Shalom.
Thank you, Johnny. Sorry I was late.
We missed you.
Up over the knuckle.
Thank you.